Hey everybody, how's it going? I regularly get asked about the kind of tools that I use, so in this video I thought I'd show what's currently in my toolkit when I'm working in my sketchbook. Now, keeping a sketchbook isn't just about practice, but it's also about experimentation and play. So these are just the tools that are kind of my go-tos for now, and I expect that others are going to be added and some might be ditched further down the road. Sketchbooks are also a place to get your bad drawings out of the way so you can get to the good ones. And I've got some bad ones I need to get out of the way today. So let's dive in and I'll show you the tools that I'm using. Alright, first things first, the sketchbook I'm using is a Moleskine or Moleskine, I don't know. But anyway, it's the 8.5 by 5 inch size. I really like that size, nice mid-size sketchbook. I like it for the portability because it does fit inside of my jacket pocket. My biggest complaint about this sketchbook is that the paper is pretty thin, so if you're doing any kind of inking or working with markers, anything like that, it's going to bleed through to the back side of the page, making it unusable. So when I'm using anything that might bleed, I just take a piece of computer paper, fold it in half, and stick it behind that page so that it doesn't continue to bleed through to the next pages. It's not really that big of a deal, but you're probably not going to want to do any kind of painting or watercolors or anything like that in this sketchbook. For sketching, I like to use mechanical pencils, mostly just because of convenience, so I don't have to sharpen regular pencils all the time or deal with the mess. I cut off a piece of Staedtler white eraser so that it has kind of more of a smaller footprint in my toolkit since I rarely use it. And not because I'm perfect, far from it. It's because when I make mistakes in my sketchbook, I'm just trying to move to the next drawing or the next page. The pencil lead refills that I have are red, blue, and your standard HB lead. But I rarely use the HB lead because I prefer sketching in red and blue, which is something I get asked about a lot, and it might be a mental thing. And I think it all started in art school when I was taking animation classes. We do our rough drawings with a blue pencil to get the rough animation down of an object or character, element, whatever. Then if there was another element or object or character that was being animated in the same scene, we'd do the rough animation of that in another color, often red. And then it would be easy to visually separate them and make sure they work together. After that, we put those drawings on a light box, put another piece of paper over the top of that to tighten those drawings up with a standard darker pencil. And when those were good, we'd repeat the process and finalize them in black ink, which is very similar to how I operate when I'm doing illustration work or comic pages. Same kind of principle. So now I've come to associate the red and the blue lead with being loose and rough, and the darker black lines as being tighter and more final. So that's pretty much why you'll see me sketching with either red or blue most of the time. Right now they're helping me to be a lot less precious in my sketchbook. Sometimes I like to use them together, like start a sketch by roughing it in lightly with either red or blue, and then use the other color to pick out the better lines, and go over that darker. Same principles with the animation and illustration. I also like to use those colors just to add different elements and tones to some of the sketches. Like on an ink drawing, or one that's got a dark line, dark blue line, whatever. Might use the red to go in and give a character a reddish nose, maybe a little blush to the cheeks, that kind of thing. I just think it looks cool, and even though the sketchbook stuff is rough, it can give some of the sketches a nice sense of completion. For this next sketchbook page, I'm going to be using every tool that's in my toolkit. Doing a portrait of Frankenstein's monster, I can't do a sketchbook without at least 1 or 10 drawings of Frankenstein's monster. I've been fascinated with Frankenstein since I was a little kid, watching the old Universal movies. Something about them. I just love them. But that's a discussion for another time. What I'm doing is I'm moving on to some inking. I'll be using the Kuretake felt tip Japanese double-ended brush pen and a Pentel pocket brush pen. First off here, I'm inking with the Kuretake brush pen, and it's less of a brush pen and it's more like a double-ended felt tip marker. Although the ends are tapered, one is smaller, one is larger. The small end is what I tend to ink with the most. I'm not sure how I found out about this pen. For some reason, I had 3 in a drawer for a few years and pulled them out when I had gotten this graphic novel job that had a deadline that was pretty tight, and it was a pretty lengthy graphic novel, and I needed to finish the thing quick. Usually when I'm inking professional work or my own work, I like to use Winsor Newton Series 7 sable brush with India ink, but sometimes dipping into the old inkwell and washing your brush over and over again adds a lot of time to a job. But the Kuretake got the job done much faster than if I'd used the sable brush, and so now it's in my sketchbook toolkit. It's not as elegant as inking with a sable brush, but you can still get some nice thin to thick line weights out of this pen if you push just a little bit, but you don't want to push too hard because the smaller end doesn't have a whole lot of give and you might split the felt. The bigger felt tip on the other side is not super great for doing any kind of inking that I found anyway, so I just basically use it for filling in big areas of black. It works really well for that. And now I'm moving on to inking with the Pentel Pocket Brush Pen, using it to do some feather effects and mostly using it in the hair. It is a more elegant pen than the Kuretake brush pen, but in my hands it's still not as elegant as when I'm inking with the sable brushes. In my hands it's a bit clunky. I know illustrators who do fantastic work with this brush pen, and I'd like to get a lot better at it because really, when I'm dipping my sable brushes into ink, then testing the brush on another piece of paper before I go to ink an illustration, and then the ink dries out, you gotta wash the brush, keep repeating that. It does add a lot of time to the process. So I would like to get a lot better at this, but I use smaller brushes with my sable brushes, so the pressure that I'm used to applying to get a nice thin to thick line for some good line weight, I haven't quite learned how to apply that to this brush pen because the brush on this is a bit thicker. So my lines end up being pretty clunky, like I said. So the Pentel Pocket Brush Pen is in my Sketchbook Toolkit because I plan to do a lot more practice with it. The next step, I've got a set of gray Copic sketch markers that I'm going to use to tone this piece of sketch. And what I'm doing here is starting off by hitting all the shadow areas with the lightest value and then moving through, kind of sculpting it out a bit, for lack of a better term, moving to the darkest value. I'm going to try to do a lot of practice in my sketchbook with these because I have in mind to use them in some final comic pages. Making comics takes a long time, and coloring the comics, the way I've been coloring them, is a lot of work. So I want to practice with these and see if I can use them to speed up that process so I can get my comics out much faster and still have a high quality finish. But we'll see. It's just something I'm thinking about right now. Someday I would like to get a set of color Copic markers too, but alas, they are so expensive. A lot of fun to work with though. Okay, now it's back to the mechanical pencils. I'm using them here in a way that I kind of already talked about. I'm using the red to add a little bit of tone, a little bit of color to give Frankenstein's monster just a little bit more life. And I'm using the blue to add just a graphic element to kind of tie this page together, make it feel a little bit more complete. And to finish this whole page off, I use a tool that I don't use very often. I use the Uniball White Gel Pen. What I use it for is just kind of adding highlights. Like on this piece, I start adding some rim light to the left side of Frankenstein's face. Oh, and to this another graphical element that I put with that sound effect blurg. Seemed like he would be saying that. I don't know why. But, bam! Looks like I went a little bit overboard with the white. So, try to scrub that out a little bit. But whatever. Now you know it's currently in my toolkit when I'm sketching in my sketchbook. And I got to get some bad drawings out of the way today. Alright, that's going to do it for today. Links to all the tools I mentioned will be in the description below with Amazon affiliate links if you'd like to pick those up. I want to thank you guys all for watching. Big thanks to my patrons at Patreon for helping to make these videos and work on my comics possible. And I will see you guys later. Oh look, a squirrel.